Rain hammered against the greasy windows of the diner like 1,000 tiny fists. Each droplet caught the red neon glow of the Lucky's Diner Open 24 hours sign, turning them into something that looked almost beautiful. Almost, but nothing in Chicago's South Side stayed beautiful for long. Grace Mitchell wiped the same spot on the bar counter for the third time. The worn rag left streaks instead of cleaning them. Her fingers were pruned from hours of dishwater and coffee spills. Nearly midnight now, and the diner reeked of burnt coffee, old grease, and the desperate smell that clung to anyone who walked through these doors at this late hour. Her feet ached in cheap sneakers, the ones with soles peeling away from the canvas. She'd been on shift since 2 in the afternoon, pulling a double because Melissa had called in sick again, and her manager, Tony, didn't care that she'd already worked 6 days straight. He just grunted and told her table 4 needed more ketchup. Grace was invisible here. Just another waitress in a stained apron. Another tired face serving eggs and bacon to truckers and insomniacs who never really looked at her. They looked through her, past her, around her. 27 years old, and she felt ancient. Dreams of graphic design school and a different life buried under student debt she'd never pay off. And rent that came due every month like clockwork. 11 years. 11 years since her parents died in that car crash, leaving her alone with a mountain of debt and a studio apartment so small the ceiling leaked every time it rained. 11 years of raising herself, picking herself up, forcing a smile when the world kept kicking her down. The bell above the door chimed, letting in a gust of wet wind that made Grace shiver. She didn't look up immediately. She'd learned not to seem too eager, too desperate for tips. But something made the air in the diner change. It got heavier somehow, thicker, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. When she finally glanced toward the door, she saw him. He didn't belong here. That was her first thought. He wore a black coat that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. The fabric so fine it seemed to repel the rain rather than absorb it. Water beaded on his shoulders like diamonds. His polished leather shoes clicked against the cracked linoleum floor, reflecting the fluorescent lights as he moved. But it wasn't his clothes that made her breath catch. It was the way he carried himself, like he owned not just the room, but the very air everyone was breathing. 2 men flanked him, both built like brick walls, their eyes constantly scanning the diner's interior. One touched his ear, an earpiece. Grace realized and murmured something too low to hear. The man in the middle didn't look at them. He didn't need to. They moved around him like satellites orbiting a planet. And Grace understood in that moment that she was looking at someone dangerous. His face was all sharp angles and dark brown eyes like obsidian stones, eyes that seemed to catch and hold the light in a way that made her stomach twist. Not old, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of presence that made everyone in the diner suddenly find their coffee cups fascinating. Even Tony, who never shut up, disappeared into the kitchen like he'd seen a ghost. Grace should have looked away, should have focused on wiping down her section, on refilling the sugar dispensers, on anything but him. But she couldn't. And then those dark eyes found hers across the room, and she felt pinned like a butterfly under glass. He moved toward the bar counter, toward her, and she could smell him as he got closer. Expensive cologne, something with notes of oak and smoke, mixing with the rain on his coat. It didn't belong with the smell of burnt coffee and old grease. Nothing about him belonged here. "Coffee," he said, his voice low and rough with an Italian accent that rolled the vowels in a way that made the simple word sound like a command. "Black." Grace's hands shook as she reached for the pot, and she hated herself for it. She'd served hundreds of customers, thousands maybe, but none of them had made her pulse race like this, made her feel like she was standing too close to a fire. She poured the coffee, trying not to slosh it over the rim of the cup. He didn't sit, just stood there, one hand in his pocket, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. His men positioned themselves near the windows, their backs to them, but their attention everywhere. "Rough night?" he asked, and Grace nearly dropped the coffee pot. "They're all rough," she said before she could stop herself, then bit her lip. "Don't talk back. Don't be memorable." But when she risked a glance at his face, she thought she saw the corner of his mouth twitch, almost like a smile. "You work too much," he observed, his eyes traveling over her stained apron, her tired face. It wasn't a question. Bills don't pay themselves. He pulled out his wallet, sleek black leather, the kind that probably had a designer name she couldn't pronounce, and placed a $100 bill on the counter. "For a $3 cup of coffee." "I don't have change for that," Grace said, even though her fingers itched to take it. $100 would mean she could actually buy groceries this week, instead of surviving on diner leftovers and ramen. "Keep it." "I can't." "You can." His tone left no room for argument, and something in his eyes made Grace understand that refusing would be more dangerous than accepting. So she took the bill with trembling fingers and shoved it in her apron pocket, her face burning. He took a sip of the coffee, and she waited for him to grimace at how terrible it was, but he just nodded slightly. One of his men, the taller one with a scar running down his cheek, murmured something, touching his earpiece, and the dangerous man's expression hardened in a way that made Grace's blood run cold. "Problem?" she asked without thinking, and immediately wanted to take it back. "Don't ask questions. Don't get involved." But he looked at her again, really looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before. "Always," he said softly, then set the cup down. There was a business card on the counter that she hadn't seen him leave, black and expensive looking with gold lettering. No name, just a phone number and a symbol. A wolf wearing a crown. He turned to leave. His men moved with him like a well-choreographed dance. They were almost at the door when Grace heard it. A small, pathetic sound that didn't belong to the rumble of thunder or the drum of rain. A whimper. A child's whimper. Grace moved without thinking, slipping out from behind the counter and peering through the streaked window. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the parking lot into a small lake, and there, huddled beside a black SUV with tinted windows, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 years old, wearing a soaked pink dress that clung to her tiny frame. Her dark curly hair was plastered to her head, and she was shaking so violently Grace could see it even from inside. Her lips looked blue in the neon light, and her eyes, wide and terrified, stared at nothing. A soaking wet stuffed rabbit lay clutched in her arms like the only thing left in the world. "Oh my God," Grace whispered. The dangerous man and his guards were already outside, not seeing the child, moving toward a different vehicle, a black Mercedes with windows so dark they looked like solidified night. They were leaving, and that little girl was going to freeze to death in the rain. Grace's body moved before her brain could catch up. She ran to the door, shoved it open, and let the rain slap her face. "Wait!" she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by thunder and the downpour. The Mercedes was already rolling away, its taillights bleeding red into the darkness. They didn't hear her. They didn't stop. Grace turned back to look at the child. The little girl's eyes, dark brown, identical to the eyes of the man who had just left, found hers. Her lips moved, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Grace ran back inside, water streaming from her hair and clothes. Tony was yelling something about tracking water everywhere, but she didn't hear him. She only saw the black business card on the counter, the crowned wolf glinting under the fluorescent lights. She didn't think, didn't pause to consider what she was doing or what it might mean. She just grabbed the diner's phone and dialed the number with trembling fingers. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "See?" A male voice, sharp and suspicious, the scarred bodyguard. "There's a little girl," Grace said, her voice breaking. "Outside the diner you just left. She's shivering in the rain and she can't speak, and I think she's in shock and I don't know what to do." The line went dead silent for 3 long heartbeats. Then a different voice, his voice, the man with the obsidian eyes, cut through. "Don't move. Don't touch her. We're coming back." The call ended with a click that sounded like a gunshot in her ear. Grace dropped the phone and ran back outside, not caring about the rain or Tony's shouting or anything except that little girl huddled in the darkness. She crouched beside the child, not touching, he'd said don't touch, but close enough to shield her from the worst of the wind. "It's okay," she whispered, even though she had no idea if it was. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay." The little girl's eyes locked onto hers, dark and empty and so scared. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just trembled. Her small hands clutched the soaking wet stuffed rabbit like it was the only thing keeping her from dissolving into the rain, and Grace knew in that moment that she'd just made the biggest decision of her life, or maybe the biggest mistake. The rain hammered down harder, turning the night into a watercolor painting of darkness and neon. Wind howled across the parking lot like wolves crying, and somewhere in the distance, Grace heard the scream of tires on wet pavement. Getting closer, getting closer. She didn't know that the man in the black Mercedes was Vincent Corsetti, the boss of one of the most powerful Mafia families in Chicago. She didn't know that the trembling little girl beside her was Mia Corsetti, his only daughter, a child who had just been kidnapped by her own deranged grandmother and abandoned in the stormy night. She didn't know that this phone call would pull her into a world of darkness and luxury, of love and imprisonment, of golden cages and a man willing to burn the world down to keep her by his side. All Grace Mitchell knew in that moment, as the headlights of 3 black vehicles tore through the rain like demon eyes. Was that her old life, the leaky apartment, the double shifts, the invisibility had just ended, and something new, something dangerous, something she couldn't yet name, had just begun. If you want to know what happens next when Grace steps into Vincent Corsetti's world, when she becomes the only person who can heal little Mia's wounds, and when she discovers that a mafia boss's love can be both heaven and hell, hit that like button to support the channel. Share this with someone who needs a story that touches the heart, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next part. 3 black cars tore through the curtain of rain like wild beasts charging toward their prey. The glare of the headlights forced Grace to narrow her eyes, yet she did not move from her place beside the child. Tires screamed across the wet asphalt, water spraying outward as all 3 vehicles stopped at the same instant with a terrifying precision. The doors flew open before the engines had fully died. That man burst from the Mercedes like a storm. His expensive coat snapped and flailed behind him. His polished leather shoes stepped straight into a puddle without a moment of hesitation, and for the first time since she had met him in the diner, Grace saw something else in those obsidian eyes. Not cold danger, not crushing power, but pure, primitive fear. The kind of fear that could drive a man to his knees. Mia. The shout ripped open the night, more painful than thunder. Oh Dio mio, Mia. He lunged forward and dropped down into the water beside the child, caring nothing for clothing that was probably worth more than a full year of Grace's rent. His large hands, the hands Grace was certain had done terrible things, trembled as they touched his daughter's small face. He lifted Mia up and held her tight against his chest, as if she might vanish at any moment. Piccola Mia, he whispered in Italian, his voice breaking apart. Papa is here. Papa is here. Grace stood there while the rain continued to pour over her, and yet she could no longer feel the cold. She could only stare at what was happening in front of her. The man who only minutes ago had made an entire diner tremble, the man who carried a power that could crush anyone foolish enough to stand in his way, was now kneeling in filthy water, his shoulders shaking in waves, his face pressed into his daughter's soaked hair. Marcus, the scarred bodyguard, appeared beside them with a silver thermal blanket. He wrapped it carefully around Mia without a word, his movements smooth and practiced, as if he had done this hundreds of times before. The other men from the 2 SUVs had also gotten out, forming a protective ring around them, their eyes sweeping the dark parking lot as though hunting an invisible enemy. How long was she out here? Vincent looked up, and his gaze found Grace. The intensity in that look made her want to step back, but her feet felt nailed to the ground. How long? I do not know, Grace stammered, her teeth beginning to chatter from the cold. I only heard her crying when you left. Maybe a few minutes, maybe longer. She cannot speak. She was just shaking and staring into nothing. Vincent closed his eyes for a single second. His jaw clenched so hard Grace could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. When he opened them again, something wild and dangerous flashed there. Something that promised violence to whoever had caused this. You called me, he said, his voice low and rough. You saw my daughter out in the rain and you called me. Not the police, not an ambulance. Me. Grace swallowed. Your card. I thought maybe she was yours. The eyes are exactly the same. A silence stretched between them, filled only by the rain and Mia's ragged breathing. Then Vincent rose, Mia still in his arms, the silver blanket shimmering beneath the neon light. He was almost a head taller than Grace, and standing this close, she could feel the heat coming off him despite the cold rain. You saved my daughter's life, he said, each word heavy as lead. And I always pay my debts. You. Grace, she whispered. Grace Mitchell. Grace Mitchell. He repeated her name slowly, as though carving it into memory. The way he said it made it sound like a promise, or perhaps a sentence. You are coming with us. It was not a question. It was not a request. I cannot. My shift is not over. I still have to. This is not an offer, Grace Mitchell. Those obsidian eyes locked onto hers, and Grace understood that refusing was not an option. Not with a man like this. Not tonight. Marcus was beside her before she even realized it, a large hand resting lightly against her back, but something hard and cold beneath his jacket reminded her that this politeness had limits. The car is ready, sir, Marcus said. Vincent nodded, then turned and walked toward the Mercedes, Mia still curled in his arms like a frightened kitten. Grace looked back at the diner one last time. Through the glass, she saw Tony standing there, his face white as paper, his mouth hanging open. He did not come outside. He did not ask if she was all right. He only stood there, Frozen in a fear Grace was only now beginning to understand. The door opened. The scent of expensive leather and luxury cologne flooded the space. Grace slid into the back seat, feeling water from her clothes seep into the cream-colored upholstery, and she wondered how much she would have to pay for ruining the interior. The door shut with a soft but final click, and Grace Mitchell understood that her old life, with double shifts and a leaking apartment and her own invisibility, had officially ended. The car rolled forward, carrying her into the night, into Vincent Corsetti's world, into a future she could not see, and perhaps could not escape. The convoy surged through Chicago's rain-slick streets like a pack of black wolves moving in the night. Grace sat silent in the back seat, feeling cold water from her clothes seep into her skin, but she did not dare to shift. Beside her, Vincent held Mia tight in his arms, his eyes never leaving his daughter's small face for even a second. Mia did not speak. She did not cry. She only trembled beneath the silver blanket, her dark brown eyes wide, fixed on emptiness, as if the child's soul had drifted somewhere no one could reach. Marcus sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally speaking in Italian into his phone, his voice low and urgent. Grace caught only a few words repeating, "Dottore, emergenza, sicurezza." She guessed they were arranging something for wherever they were headed. "You are cold." Vincent's voice cut through the silence, making Grace flinch. He did not look at her, his gaze still pinned to Mia, but the words were a statement, not a question. "I am fine," Grace said, even though her teeth were chattering. Vincent did not answer. He only pulled off the expensive coat he was wearing, the motion awkward because he still held Mia with one arm, then tossed it toward Grace. The coat was still warm with body heat, and heavier than any coat she had ever touched. A faint scent of oak wood and cigarette smoke clung to the fabric. "Put it on." Again, an order, not an offer. Grace wanted to refuse. She wanted to say she did not need his pity, but the cold won. She draped the coat over her shoulders, feeling as if she were wearing a giant's clothing, the hem falling nearly to her knees. "Why did you call me?" Vincent asked it suddenly, and this time he turned his head to look at her. In the tight space of the car, those obsidian eyes were so close Grace could see tiny flecks of gold glinting within the dark. "You did not know who I am. You did not know what that card meant, and yet you still called." Grace swallowed, her throat dry. "I saw the child's eyes. Exactly like yours. I thought if she was your daughter, you would want to know. And if I am a dangerous man, if I am the one who did this to her, then you would not have looked like that when you saw her." Grace did not know where she found the courage to say it. No one can fake that kind of panic. No one drops to their knees in filthy water for a child they mean to harm. Vincent went quiet for a long time, his eyes studying Grace's face as if he were trying to solve a complicated riddle. "Everyone is afraid of me," he said at last, his voice low and strangely steady. "Even the people who work for me are afraid. They lower their heads. They follow orders. They never dare to look me in the eye. But you asked me if something was wrong as if I were just an ordinary customer drinking coffee at midnight. I did not know who you were," Grace admitted. "I still do not." A faint laugh slipped from Vincent's throat, brief and without warmth. "Vincent Corsetti. And this little girl is Mia, my only daughter." He paused, his jaw tightening. "She was kidnapped a week ago. I have torn through this city, using every resource, every connection, and then tonight, she is abandoned in a miserable parking lot, less than 20 meters from where I was standing, and I did not see her." His voice cracked on the last word, and Grace saw what very few people were ever allowed to witness. Vincent Corsetti breaking apart. "Who kidnapped her?" Grace asked softly, not understanding why she cared. "Her grandmother." Each word came out like poison. "Patricia Holloway, my ex-wife's mother. She blames me for her daughter's death, and she thinks the best revenge is to steal the thing I value most." "Your ex-wife," Grace began, then stopped, unwilling to intrude. "Dead," Vincent said flatly. 2 years ago. Overdose." He looked down at Mia, a finger stroking the child's wet curls. Mia watched her mother die, and now her grandmother kidnaps her and abandons her in a storm. She is 5 years old, and she has lived through more than anyone should have to endure in a lifetime. Grace felt her chest tighten. She looked at the small child in the arms of a powerful man, and for the first time, she did not see a mafia boss or a dangerous stranger. She saw only a desperate father and a shattered child. "She will be all right," Grace heard herself say, even though she had no right to promise anything. "She still has you." Vincent looked at her again, and something shifted in those dark eyes. Not softness, not gratitude, something far more dangerous. Attention, interest, the look a man like Vincent Corsetti gave to something he wanted to possess. "You are not afraid of me," he said slowly. "You should be afraid, Grace Mitchell. Everyone should be afraid." The car stopped in front of a tower of glass and steel that rose into the sky, light from within spilling warmth into the rain. Grace did not recognize where they were, but she knew one thing for certain. She had stepped onto the wolf's territory, and the road back had slammed shut behind her. The building was not an ordinary hospital. Grace understood that the moment the convoy did not take the main entrance, but turned down a ramp into the basement, where thick steel gates opened automatically as they approached. There was no sign, no flashing emergency lights, no wail of ambulances, only controlled silence, and soft lighting that revealed an underground parking area so strangely spotless it looked as if every corner had been wiped by hand. Marcus got out first, his eyes sweeping the space, before he gave a short nod that it was safe. Vincent stepped out with Mia still in his arms, and a woman in a white coat was already waiting beside a rolling gurney, her Asian face calm and professional, giving away no emotion at all. "Dr. Chen," Vincent said, his voice tight. "She is hypothermic. She will not speak, possibly shock." Dr. Chen nodded once, her sharp eyes taking in Mia's condition in a single swift assessment. She did not ask what had happened. She did not request paperwork or medical history. She only said, in a voice gentle but full of authority, "Bring her with me. Now." Grace climbed out of the car, her legs unsteady on the smooth concrete. She still wore Vincent's coat, far too large and dragging near the ground, making her look like a child dressed in an adult's clothes. No one looked at her. No one asked who she was, or why she was here. They only moved, fast and silent, like gears in a perfectly lubricated machine. The elevator carried them up to a floor Grace could not find on any buttons. Marcus swiped a black card across the panel, and the elevator moved so smoothly she barely felt it. When the doors opened, Grace stepped into an entirely different world. A wide corridor, warm oak-paneled walls, cream-colored marble floors, expensive abstract paintings hung along the length of it, and somewhere there was the faint scent of lilies. If not for the modern medical equipment cleverly concealed behind frosted glass doors, Grace would have thought she had walked into a 5-star hotel, not a hospital. Dr. Chen took Mia into a room at the end of the hall, and Vincent stayed at her heels, never leaving his daughter by so much as a step. Grace stopped in the middle of the corridor, unsure where she should go, or what she should do. She felt like an ink stain on white silk. Soaked clothes, tangled hair, completely out of place in all this luxury. "Follow me." A gentle woman's voice sounded beside her, and Grace turned to see an older woman, perhaps around 60, dressed in an elegant gray suit, her silver hair pinned neatly back. Her face was kind, but her eyes were sharp, the eyes of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. "I am Rosa, Mr. Corsetti's housekeeper," she said, placing a light hand at Grace's back. "You are freezing. Come with me." Grace wanted to protest, wanted to say she did not need anyone taking care of her, but her feet followed Rosa anyway, as if her body was too exhausted to argue. They passed through another door into a small warm room where a fire burned in a hearth, and deep armchairs were upholstered in dark blue velvet. Rosa gently slipped Vincent's coat from Grace's shoulders and replaced it with a soft cream cashmere blanket. "Sit down, child," Rosa said, her voice warm as an embrace. "I will bring you hot tea." Grace sank into the armchair near the fire, and for the first time since stepping out into the rain, she felt warmth. It spread from the flames, from the blanket, seeping into every layer of her stiffened skin, and with that warmth, exhaustion crashed over her like a tidal wave, making her eyes grow heavy, her thoughts blurring at the edges. Rosa returned with a cup of hot tea in a delicate white porcelain mug. Grace accepted it with both hands, the heat of it warming fingers that still trembled. "Little Mia will be all right," Rosa said, as if she could read Grace's mind. "Because of you. Dear Lord, because of you. I only made a call," Grace whispered. "Anyone would have done it." Rosa looked at her with a strange expression, half pity, half admiration. "No, child, not everyone would. In this place, in this world, most people would turn their faces away and pretend they did not see anything. You chose something different. And that means more than you think." Through the frosted glass of the room, Grace could make out Vincent's silhouette moving back and forth in the corridor, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched into fists. Now and then he stopped to say something into his phone, his voice low and threatening even though Grace could not make out the words. Dr. Chen went in and out of Mia's room several times, exchanging short sentences with Vincent, which he received with an expression that grew darker each time. What kind of man is he? Grace heard herself ask before she could stop. Rosa fell silent for a long while, her eyes fixed on Vincent with something that looked like a mother's love. "He is the most dangerous man you will ever meet," she said at last. "But he is also a father who loves his daughter more than anything in this world. Those two things do not cancel each other out, child. In our world, they often come together." Grace did not know what to say. She only sipped her tea and watched the fire, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. This morning she had been a nameless waitress in a miserable diner. Now she was sitting in a secret Mafia hospital, drinking tea from an expensive porcelain cup, being cared for by the housekeeper of a crime lord. The door opened, and Vincent walked in. He looked as though he had aged 10 years since the diner, hollow-eyed, drawn. But when those obsidian eyes found Grace, something shifted in them. Not softness, not quite gratitude, something deeper, something more primitive. "Mia is stable now," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Dr. Chen says she has moderate hypothermia and psychological shock. She will need time to recover, physically and mentally." He paused, swallowing as if the next words were almost impossible to speak. "You saved my daughter's life, Grace Mitchell. If you had not called, if you had been 10 minutes later." He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. They both knew what would have happened. "I owe you," Vincent said, and each word landed like an oath, and Vincent Corsetti always pays his debts. Always. Grace looked up and met those dark eyes, and a strange feeling settled over her, as if she had just signed a contract she had not been allowed to read. A contract written in blood and fire, in darkness and light, in all the things she could not understand, and it was already too late to refuse. Outside the window, the rain still fell. But inside this room, in the warmth of the firelight and the soft fragrance of tea, Grace had the sense that the real storm had only just begun. Vincent sat down in the chair across from Grace, and for the first time she saw him truly exhausted. The overwhelming aura of power was gone. The sharp, icy gaze of a ruler was gone. What remained was a man worn down to the bone, shoulders slumped, hands resting on his knees as if he needed something to hold him upright. Rosa slipped quietly out of the room, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded like a breath. "You want to know what happened," Vincent said, not as a question. "I can see it in your eyes. Curiosity. But there is something else, too. You care. You truly care." Grace did not deny it. She had tried not to think about the little girl trembling in the rain, about the empty eyes and the soaked stuffed rabbit, but the image kept haunting her like a wound that refused to heal. "My wife, Sarah, was a beautiful woman," Vincent began, his voice distant, as if he were speaking to himself more than to Grace. "Beautiful and fragile. She was not born into my world. She was the daughter of an ordinary middle-class family in the suburbs. I met her at an art exhibit, back when I was still trying to pretend I was a legitimate businessman." A faint laugh slipped out, bitter and hollow. "She saw me and she was not afraid. Just like you." Grace felt her heart tighten on that last phrase, but she did not interrupt. "We got married. We had Mia, and everything seemed perfect." Vincent paused, his jaw clenching. "Then Sarah had a car accident. Nothing catastrophic, just broken ribs and a mild spinal injury. The doctors prescribed pain medication, oxycodone. He spat the name like poison, and that was the beginning of the end." Grace understood at once. She had seen it too many times in her own neighborhood. Ordinary people dragged into addiction by a legal prescription, a pain that would not let go, a single weak moment. Sarah could not stop. Vincent went on, his voice sinking so low Grace had to lean forward to catch it. "Oxycodone became Vicodin. Vicodin became heroin when the prescriptions ran out. I tried everything, the most exclusive rehabs, the best therapists. I even locked her in the house with 24 guards, but you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved." He lifted his head, and Grace saw tears pooled in those obsidian eyes, though not a single drop fell. This was a man who controlled everything, even his own tears. 2 years ago, Sarah overdosed in the bathroom. Mia found her. Vincent's voice broke on the last words, and he had to stop to steady himself. She was 4 years old. She pushed open the bathroom door and saw her mother on the floor, eyes wide open, white foam bubbling at her mouth. She stood there, alone. She did not know for how long, until the maid found them both. Grace raised a hand to cover her mouth, nausea rising in her throat. She thought of Mia's empty stare out in the rain, the way the child had not cried, had not spoken, only trembled like a small wounded animal. Now she understood. That look had not been the look of a lost child. It was the look of a child who had seen hell and had never truly come back. Patricia, Sarah's mother, blamed me, Vincent said, his voice hardening. She said I dragged her daughter into my darkness, that I killed Sarah with the life I gave her. She sued for custody of Mia, lost, sued again, lost again. Then she started drinking, more every day, until hate and alcohol fused together and turned her into something deranged. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the rain that still poured over the city. His broad back was drawn tight as a wire, and Grace could see each muscle fighting the rage boiling inside him. A week ago, Patricia broke into Mia's preschool. She pretended to be the grandmother picking her up early, and because the school knew the family connection, they let her take the child. Vincent's voice hissed through his teeth. I tore through this city. I called in every favor, every resource, every debtor and ally. No one found her. Patricia knows how to hide. She knows the cracks in my system because Sarah told her things. He turned back, and his eyes met Grace's with an intensity that stole her breath. And then tonight, I stopped for coffee in a miserable diner, only because Marcus needed to check a tip in the area. And my daughter was right there, less than 20 meters from me, abandoned in the rain like some small animal no one wanted. He drew in a deep breath, trembling. Patricia was drunk. She panicked when a patrol car drove by, and she ran. She left Mia. She left her own granddaughter in a dark parking lot in the middle of a storm. Grace stood without realizing she was moving. She stepped toward Vincent, and before she could think, her hand rested on his arm. The muscle beneath his shirt was hard as stone, but he did not pull away. He only looked down at her small hand on his arm with an expression she could not read. It is not your fault, Grace said softly. About Sarah. About Mia being taken. You cannot control what other people choose to do. I am Vincent Corsetti, he said, bitter. I control this entire city, but I could not save my wife from herself, and I could not protect my daughter from her grandmother's madness. He looked into Grace's eyes, and she saw the fracture hidden behind the mask of power. Do you know what that means? Failing at the things that matter most while succeeding at all the things that are worthless. Grace did not answer right away. She thought about the past 11 years, the dreams she had buried, the leaking apartment, the double shifts, the daily feeling of being invisible. She had not been able to control her parents' fate. She had not been able to stop death from taking them, and she had carried that failure for 11 years. I understand, she said at last, and she truly did. But Mia is still here. You still have a chance. Do not waste it on blaming yourself. Vincent watched her for a long time, so silent Grace could hear the rain tapping the glass and the wood cracking softly in the fire. Then he did something that caught her completely off guard. He nodded. Just a small nod, but it carried a respect Grace had never received from anyone in her life. You are different, Grace Mitchell, he said. You did not ask how I make my money. You were not afraid when you learned who I am. You only asked whether Mia was all right. He tilted his head, studying her as if she were a puzzle he could not solve. Why? Grace thought about that question for a long time. Because I know what it is to lose everything, she said at last. And I know that in that moment, the only thing that matters is that someone cares. Not money, not power, just someone who sees you and does not turn away. Outside, the rain still fell. But in this warm room, between a mafia boss and a poor waitress, an invisible thread had begun to form, fragile as spider silk, yet strong as steel. Dr. Chen knocked softly, then stepped in, her face still composed, but her eyes carrying important news. Vincent turned toward her at once, his body tight as a drawn bow, and Grace could see him bracing for the worst. Mia's physical condition has stabilized, Dr. Chen said, her tone professional and even. Her temperature is back to normal. There are no signs of pneumonia or internal injury. Medically, she should make a full recovery within a few days. Vincent let out a long breath, as if he had been holding it for an entire hour. But Dr. Chen was not finished. However, psychologically, the situation is far more complicated. She paused, choosing her words with care. Mia is experiencing what we call selective mutism. It is a psychological response to severe trauma. She is capable of speaking, but her brain is refusing to activate language as a self-protective mechanism. Does that mean she will never speak again? Vincent's voice broke. It means she needs time, safety, and most of all, someone she feels she can trust. Dr. Chen looked toward Grace, her gaze deliberate, and what is notable is that since she woke up, Mia has been looking toward the door again and again. She is not looking for you, Mr. Corsetti. She is looking for the woman who sat beside her in the rain. Grace felt her heart miss a beat. She looked at Vincent, then at Dr. Chen, not sure she had heard correctly. "I want to see my daughter," Vincent said, his voice giving nothing away, though Grace could see his jaw grinding tight. "Of course, but I recommend Miss Mitchell come with you." Dr. Chen's words landed like a medical directive, not a suggestion. "Her presence may help Mia feel safer." Vincent said nothing. He only gave a short nod and walked out. Grace rose, her legs still unsteady, and followed him down the corridor washed in gentle light. They stopped before an oak door, and Vincent set his hand on the knob but did not open it right away. He stood there for a moment, as if gathering himself, and only then pushed the door inward. The room inside had been designed to look as little like a hospital as possible. Soft blush-pink walls, curtains printed with butterflies, a small bed dressed in clean white linens. Medical equipment was cleverly concealed behind draped fabric, and along the windowsill sat a row of stuffed animals in bright colors. But nothing in that room could erase the image of a tiny child lying in the center of the bed, eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling as if searching for something only she could see. "Mia," Vincent said softly, stepping to the bedside and lowering to one knee so his face was level with his daughter's. "Papa is here, Piccola Mia. You are safe now." Mia did not respond. Her dark brown eyes remained fixed on emptiness, as if Vincent did not exist. Her small hand clenched the stuffed rabbit, now dried and cleaned, but otherwise there was no movement at all. Grace saw pain slice through Vincent's face like a blade, and she understood that for a man who controlled everything, being unable to reach his own child was the cruelest kind of torture. Then Grace moved forward, not knowing what she was doing, only following instinct. She sat on the edge of the bed, opposite Vincent, and placed her hand on the blanket near Mia's small hand without touching her. "Hi, Mia," Grace said gently, her voice still rough with cold and exhaustion. "I am Grace. I sat with you out in the rain, do you remember? You and your bunny were very brave." A small change happened. Mia blinked. Then, slowly, her gaze shifted, searching for the source of the voice. When her eyes met Grace's, something flickered in the dark. Not joy, not recognition, but something. Connection, attention. "What is your bunny's name?" Grace asked, her voice still soft, as if she were telling a fairy tale. Silence. But Mia was looking at her. Truly looking, not looking through her the way she had looked through everyone else. "Biscuit." A weak whisper floated out, fragile as a butterfly wing. Vincent went still. Grace went still. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. "Biscuit," Grace repeated, a trembling smile forming on her lips. "That is a very beautiful name." Mia said nothing more, but her small hand began to move, slow and searching, until slender fingers found Grace's hand and closed around it. The grip was weak, but determined, as if the child were clinging to a lifeline in rough water. Grace looked up and met Vincent's eyes. In those obsidian depths, she saw an entire storm of emotion, pain that his daughter would not turn toward him, gratitude, deep and unspoken, because someone else could reach her, and something else, something that made Grace want to pull her hand away, yet she could not. Resolve. Possession. The look of a man who had just found something precious, and would never let it slip from his grasp. "Stay," Vincent said. Only one word, but it carried the weight of an entire kingdom. "With Mia. Tonight." Grace wanted to refuse. She wanted to say she needed to go home, needed to think, needed to escape this spiral while she still could. But the small hand was holding hers, and the dark brown eyes were fixed on her with the fear that she would disappear, like everyone else who had left the child behind. "All right," Grace heard herself say. "I will stay." And she knew, with an icy certainty in her chest, that she had just taken one more step deeper into Vincent Corsetti's world, a world where the exit was slipping farther away with every breath. Grace woke to sunlight filtering through blush-pink curtains, and to a small hand still wrapped tightly around hers. She had fallen asleep sitting in the chair beside Mia's bed, her neck stiff and her back aching, but she did not dare to move, afraid she would wake the child who was sleeping peacefully for the first time after so many days of terror. Mia was curled in on herself like a kitten, the rabbit biscuit pressed to her chest, her little face finally relaxed in sleep instead of clenched with fear. The door opened quietly, and Rosa stepped in with a breakfast tray. the scent of hot coffee and toast spreading through the air. She set the tray on a small table near the window, then looked at the sight of Grace and Mia with eyes full of feeling. "She slept all night," Rosa whispered. "The first time since that woman kidnapped her. Mr. Corsetti came to check 3 times, but he did not want to wake either of you." Grace did not know how to react to the information that Vincent Corsetti had stood there watching her sleep 3 times during the night. She only nodded, trying to ease her hand out of Mia's grasp. But the moment she moved, dark brown eyes opened, and the small hand tightened. "Grace." Mia's voice was weak and rough, but it was the most beautiful sound Grace had ever heard. "I am here," Grace said softly, sitting back down. "I am not going anywhere." Mia watched her for a long moment, as if she needed to confirm the promise was real, then slowly let go. But her eyes followed every movement Grace made, as if afraid Grace would disappear the instant she blinked. Rosa helped Grace to her feet and guided her out into the corridor while a nurse stepped in to tend to Mia. Grace's legs were numb after the long night in the chair, and she had to brace herself against the wall to stay steady. "Mr. Corsetti wants to see you," Rosa said. "In his office. I will take you after you eat breakfast and change." "Change?" Grace looked down at her server uniform, still damp and wrinkled, and realized how miserable she looked. Rosa seemed to read her thoughts and offered a small smile. "I have prepared clothes for you in the bathroom. Do not worry. Just something simple." Simple by Rosa's standards turned out to be a pair of trousers and a cream silk blouse that Grace was certain cost more than a month of her wages. She put them on with a strange feeling, as if she were stepping into a role meant for someone else, someone who belonged in a world of marble and silk. Vincent's office was at the end of the corridor, behind a heavy oak door. Marcus stood guard outside, nodded to Grace when she arrived, then opened the door and let her in. The room was large, lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, and dominated by an enormous desk of dark walnut. Vincent stood at the window, looking out over Chicago washed in morning light, the complete opposite of last night's storm. He had changed, dressed in a charcoal gray suit and a white shirt, but his eyes still carried the weariness of a man who had not slept. "Sit," Vincent said without turning around. "We need to talk." Grace sat in the leather chair in front of the desk, feeling as though she were facing a tribunal. Vincent finally turned, walked to the desk, and sat down in the chair across from her instead of behind it. The closeness let Grace see the shadows beneath his eyes and the tight cords of tension along his neck. "Mia spoke to you," he began, his voice low and thoughtful. "For the first time in a week, she opened her mouth, and she said your name." "I do not know why," Grace said honestly. "I only sat beside her. That is exactly why." Vincent leaned forward, those obsidian eyes locking on hers. "You did not try to force her to speak. You did not look at her with pity or fear. You were simply there, calm, warm, and somehow she felt that." Grace did not know what to say, so she stayed silent. "I have a proposal," Vincent continued, and something in his tone made Grace understand it was not entirely a proposal. "Stay here. 1 week, help Mia settle. Help her adjust to having someone beside her that she trusts. Mr. Corsetti, I am not a nanny or a therapist. I am just a waitress. You are the only person my daughter will speak to." Vincent cut in, his voice sharpening. "Do you think that has no value? I have a job. I have a life. I need to go back and—" "The diner fired you." Vincent said it with a blank expression, as if he were reporting the weather. "I checked this morning. Tony saw the men you left with, and the power they carry. He is a man who avoids trouble at any cost. He told my men that he cannot risk the heat your new associations might bring to his diner, so he has already cleared out your locker and barred you from the property." Grace felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach. The worst job in the world, but it had still been her job, her only income. "I will pay you," Vincent went on, as if losing her job were a minor detail. 10 times what you made at that diner. You will have your own room, food, everything you need. Just 1 week. Help Mia." Grace wanted to refuse. Every survival instinct in her was screaming that this was a trap, that once she stepped deeper in there would be no way out. But then she thought of the small hand gripping hers all night. She thought of the dark eyes watching her with the fear of being abandoned. She thought of the weak whisper saying her name as if it were the only lifeline left. "Only 1 week?" she asked, and the moment the words left her mouth she knew she had already lost. 1 week, Vincent confirmed, but something in his gaze made Grace doubt the promise. "After that, you are free to go anywhere you want." The office door opened suddenly, and Mia stood there in pink pajamas, the rabbit biscuit dragging along the floor. her eyes searching the room until they found Grace. The small face brightened, and the child ran in, clinging to Grace's leg as if Grace might disappear. "Grace, stay," Mia asked, her voice still a whisper, but full of fragile hope. Grace looked down at the child, then up at Vincent. He said nothing, only sat there with an unreadable expression, but she knew he had known the answer before she ever spoke. "Yes," Grace said, her hand moving without thinking to smooth Mia's curly hair. "Grace stays." Mia's smile was small and trembling, but it was her first smile since that terrible night, and for that smile, Grace was willing to step deeper into the darkness, even though she did not know what it would cost her. Vincent Corsetti's penthouse sat on the top floor of a skyscraper in the Gold Coast, the kind of place where a single night's stay probably cost as much as a full year of rent for Grace's studio apartment. She was brought here on the second day, after Dr. Chen confirmed Mia was well enough to leave the hospital, and the moment Grace stepped out of the private elevator, she had to stop and absorb what she was seeing. White marble floors gleamed, reflecting the light from crystal chandeliers hanging from a high ceiling. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls opened onto a sweeping view of Chicago, Lake Michigan stretching in the distance like an enormous mirror, leather and rare wood furnishings. Paintings Grace was certain were originals, not reproductions, and a glossy black grand piano positioned by the window as if it had belonged there since the beginning of time. "Your room is in the east wing," Rosa said, guiding Grace down a long corridor. "Next to Mia's room, so she can find you easily if she needs you." Grace's room was larger than her entire old apartment. A king-size bed dressed in ivory sheets, a private bathroom with both a standing shower and a soaking tub, an empty walk-in closet waiting to be filled, and on the bed, like a reminder that she no longer belonged to her old world, were 3 shopping bags from boutiques Grace had never dared to step into. "Mr. Corsetti arranged some basic things for you," Rosa said with a gentle smile. "If you need anything else, just tell me." Grace wanted to protest. She wanted to say she did not need expensive clothes or a lavish bedroom, that she was only here for a week and no one needed to spend money on her. But as she opened her mouth, Mia appeared in the doorway, Biscuit the rabbit in her hand, her dark brown eyes lighting up at the sight of Grace. "Grace here," the child said, still in a whisper, but clearer than yesterday. Grace with Mia. And just like that, every protest dissolved. The first week passed in a strange rhythm Grace had not expected to feel familiar so quickly. Every morning, she woke to Mia's soft knock, the child learning that Grace did not disappear overnight. They ate breakfast together in the vast dining room, Mia sitting beside Grace instead of beside her father, and Vincent watching from the head of the table with an expression Grace could not read. In the afternoons, Grace and Mia drew pictures in the playroom full of toys the child had barely touched. Mia liked to draw houses, always houses, stick figures standing together, a round sun in the corner of the page. She did not draw her mother. She did not draw her grandmother. She drew only 3 people, a tall man, a long-haired woman, and a small child in the middle. "Who is this?" Grace asked once, pointing to the woman. "Grace," Mia answered simply, as if it were obvious. "Grace with Mia and Papa." Grace did not know what to say, so she only smiled and kept drawing, pretending her heart had not just tightened. Mia slowly began to speak more, one short sentence at a time. "Mia wants water. Grace read book. Biscuit sleepy." Each sentence was a small victory, a step forward on the long road back. Dr. Chen came to check on her twice that week, and each time she looked at Grace with a knowing expression, as if she were witnessing a miracle she could not explain with medicine. But not everything was a fairy tale. Grace quickly realized this penthouse was not only a home, it was the command center of a dark empire. Men in black suits came and went from Vincent's office all day, their voices low and tense behind a closed door. Sometimes Grace heard shouting in Italian. Sometimes she heard a fist slam into a desk. And once, she caught a glimpse of Marcus escorting a pale-faced man out of the elevator, blood running from his nose. She did not ask. Vincent did not explain. It was an unspoken agreement between them, a boundary neither of them crossed. But at night, when the penthouse sank into silence, and Mia slept deeply, Grace often woke and stepped onto the balcony to breathe the night air. And more than once, she found Vincent there as well, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out over the city with eyes full of secrets she was not sure she wanted to know. "You cannot sleep," he said on one such night, not a question. "The bed is too soft," Grace replied. "I am used to sleeping on a mattress with springs stabbing my back." Vincent did not laugh, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "You will get used to it. I do not plan to stay long enough to get used to it." "We will see," he said, then turned away before Grace could ask what he meant. On the last day of the first week, Grace woke and discovered her walk-in closet was full. Not 3 shopping bags anymore, but dozens of dresses, blouses, trousers, shoes, all in her exact size, all carrying labels she had never dared to dream of, and on the vanity, a new phone, the latest model. Beside it, a scrap of paper with hurried handwriting. Your old phone battery died. V. Grace picked up the phone, unlocked the screen, and froze when she saw a tracking app already installed, its icon blinking red like an eye that never stopped watching. She wanted to throw it away. She wanted to storm into Vincent's office and shout in his face that she was not an object to be tracked. But then Mia knocked at the door, the child's voice calling from the other side. Grace. Mia wants breakfast with Grace. And Grace slipped the phone into her pocket, swallowed her anger, and opened the door with a smile. Because she had learned one thing in this first week. In Vincent Corsetti's world, freedom was only a beautiful illusion, and she, whether she wanted to or not, had begun to forget where the exit was. The second week began with a conversation Grace had been preparing for 2 days. She waited until Mia fell asleep for her afternoon nap, then found Vincent in his office and knocked with iron resolve in her chest. I want to go outside, she said flatly, without detours. Just take a walk around the neighborhood. Breathe the air. See the sky without glass in between. Vincent looked up from a stack of papers, his obsidian eyes studying her face for a long moment. Fine. Marcus will go with you. Alone, Grace insisted. I want to go by myself. Silence stretched between them, heavy as lead. Vincent set his pen down, leaned back in his chair, and looked at her with an expression Grace could not read. Not safe, he said at last. You matter to my daughter. That makes you a potential target. Marcus goes with you, or you do not go anywhere. Grace wanted to argue, wanted to point out that she had lived 27 years in Chicago without needing anyone to protect her. But Vincent's eyes told her this was not a negotiation. It was an order wrapped in courtesy. She walked outside with Marcus a few steps behind her, following like a massive shadow. People on the street looked at them, looked at the scarred man in a black suit with a gun hidden beneath his coat, then hurriedly stepped aside. Grace felt as if she were parading inside a moving cage. Freedom, nothing but a mirage. On the 3rd day of the 2nd week, Grace decided to contact Amy, her former co-worker at the diner, and the only friend she had. She called from the new phone, but the call lasted only 3 minutes before Marcus appeared in her doorway with a grave expression. Mr. Corsetti wishes to remind you that all outside contact needs to be reported in advance, he said, polite but edged with meaning. For security reasons. Grace looked down at the phone in her hand, remembered the red blinking location icon, and understood that it was not only her position being monitored. Every call, every message, everything was under Vincent Corsetti's control. I was just calling my friend, she said, her voice shaking with anger. One call, to a friend. Of course, Marcus nodded. But next time, please inform us first. He left, and Grace sat on the bed, staring at the wall as if she could see through it. The wall was covered in exquisitely patterned wallpaper, beautiful and expensive, but it was still a wall, still a barrier between her and the outside world. That afternoon, Grace went down to the main foyer, intending to go out without warning. She only wanted to test it. She only wanted to know where her boundary truly was. But when she reached the elevator, 2 men in black suits were already standing there, nodding to her with polite smiles. Miss Mitchell, where do you need to go? We will arrange a car. It was not a real question. It was a reminder that she could not go anywhere unless they knew. That night, Grace did not go out to the balcony. She lay on the bed, staring up at the high ceiling, and thought about her leaking studio apartment. It had been cramped, filthy, and cold in winter, but it had been hers. She could come and go whenever she wanted without asking anyone. On the 5th day, Grace discovered something that made her freeze in the living room. Rosa, she called, her voice so calm it was frightening. My things in my old apartment. What happened to them? Rosa hesitated for a single second, and that hesitation was already an answer. Mr. Corsetti arranged to have your belongings brought here, she said finally. Yesterday. He thought you would want familiar things. Grace walked to the storage room Rosa indicated, and there it all was. 4 cardboard boxes holding her entire life. Old books, photos of her parents, the graphic design portfolio she had never finished. Everything packed carefully and brought here without anyone asking her. She found Vincent in his office and pushed the door open without knocking. When did you order this? Her voice trembled, not knowing whether it was anger or fear. Vincent looked up, not surprised by her intrusion. "The day you agreed to stay. I did not want you worrying about trivial things." "Trivial," Grace repeated, her voice rising. "That is my life, my home. And you cleared it out without asking me a single question." "That apartment is not a home," Vincent said calmly, standing and walking toward her. "It is a filthy box with a leaking ceiling and rats in the walls. You deserve more than that. That is not your decision." "You are right." He stopped in front of her, close enough that Grace could smell his expensive cologne. "But you belong here now. With Mia." He paused, not finishing. "You belong here." Grace wanted to scream in his face, wanted to say she belonged to no one, and nowhere except herself. But as she opened her mouth, small footsteps sounded in the hallway. "Grace, Papa." Mia's voice was anxious. Why shouting? Grace's anger deflated like a punctured balloon. She turned and saw Mia standing in the doorway with Biscuit, dark brown eyes filled with that familiar fear, the fear of a child who had heard too much shouting in her life. "It is all right, sweetheart," Grace said gently, stepping forward and kneeling in front of Mia. "The adults are just talking. No one is shouting." Mia looked at her, then at Vincent, as if trying to confirm Grace's words. Vincent nodded, his expression softening when he looked at his daughter. "Grace is right, Piccola. We are only talking." Mia took Grace's hand and tugged lightly. "Grace, play with Mia. Mia wants draw." Grace stood, letting Mia lead her out of the office. But before she left, she looked back at Vincent one last time. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, obsidian eyes tracking her with something that looked like victory mixed with hunger, and Grace understood the cage had closed behind her. Softly, gently, wrapped in silk and promises, but still a cage. Despite the velvet-wrapped captivity, Grace realized she was truly falling in love with Mia, not the kind of affection born of duty or pity, but something deep and primal, the kind she had always believed belonged only to blood. The 5-year-old with dark brown eyes and a rabbit named Biscuit had slipped into Grace's heart without her noticing, taken root there, and refused to leave. Mia began calling her Mama Grace on the 12th day, not on purpose, not because anyone told her to. The child was sitting and drawing, her tongue peeking out to one side in concentration, when she suddenly looked up and said, "Mama Grace, I want the blue one." Grace froze. The pencil slipped from her fingers and clicked softly against the table. She meant to correct her, meant to say she was only Grace, but Mia's eyes held absolute trust, and the words caught in Grace's throat. "Here you go, sweetheart," Grace said instead, handing her the blue crayon. "Blue is beautiful." Mia smiled, a smile that had begun to show up more often, then went right back to drawing as if nothing unusual had happened. But for Grace, the world tilted slightly, and the boundaries she had built for herself began to blur. That afternoon, when Vincent returned from a long meeting, he stopped at the playroom doorway when he heard laughter spilling out from inside. Grace and Mia were making cookies in the little kitchen set in the corner of the room, a toy kitchen, but with real ingredients Rosa had prepared. Flour floated everywhere, on Grace's face, in Mia's hair, even on Biscuit, sitting upright on a chair like an honored guest. No, you have to stir slowly," Grace laughed, guiding Mia's small hand around the wooden spoon. "Like this, see. Circles, circles, circles," Mia echoed, her face smeared with flour, but so bright it made Grace's heart feel as if it might burst. Vincent stood in the doorway and said nothing. He only watched, and when Grace happened to look up and catch his gaze, she saw something she had never seen in him before. Not cold control, not crushing power, but a kind of brokenness, the brokenness of a man staring at something beautiful he knows he does not deserve. "Papa." Mia squealed when she saw her father, but she did not run to Vincent the way other children would. Instead, she grabbed Grace's hand and tugged her closer. "Papa, look, Mama Grace and Mia making cookies." The words Mama Grace rang in the air like a bell. Grace looked at Vincent, waiting for protest, for anger, for anything, but he only swallowed, his jaw tightening for a single second, then stepped into the room with a thin smile. "Is Papa's girl making cookies?" Vincent asked, lowering to one knee so he was level with Mia's eyes. And that gesture, so simple, so ordinary, made Grace's chest feel heavy. "Does Papa get to taste them?" "Not done," Mia declared seriously. "Have to bake first, then eat. Mama Grace said so." Vincent lifted his eyes to Grace, and for a brief moment all the walls, all the barriers, all the boundaries between them seemed to thin. There were only two adults looking at each other over the head of a child, sharing the ache of broken souls trying to mend. "Mama Grace is right," Vincent said softly. "Always listen to Mama Grace." That night, after Mia fell asleep with the scent of cookies still lingering on her breath, Grace stood in the doorway and watched the child breathing evenly. Vincent appeared beside her without her noticing, close enough that she could feel the warmth from his body, but he did not touch her. "You did what I could not," he said, his voice low and rough in the dark. She laughed. "For the first time in 2 years, I heard my daughter's real laugh. Not because of expensive toys or things I buy her, because of you, because of flour and cookies and your presence." Grace did not know what to say. She stood there, her heart beating too fast for any sensible reason. "Who are you, Grace Mitchell?" Vincent asked, almost a whisper. "Where did you come from, and why do you have the power to heal wounds that every expert I hired could not touch?" "I am just a waitress," Grace replied, her voice barely more than breath. "A waitress with no parents who knows what loneliness feels like." Vincent turned to her, and in the dim hallway light, his obsidian eyes shimmered as if they held an entire star-filled universe. He lifted a hand and touched Grace's cheek, his fingers trembling as though he were touching something sacred. "You are not just a waitress," he said. "Not to Mia, not to me." Grace knew she should step back. She knew this was a dangerous road, a slick slope that once you slid down you could never climb again. But the warmth of his hand against her cheek, the look in his dark eyes carrying an ocean of loneliness, and Mia's steady breathing behind her like a lullaby, held her in place. "What kind of man are you, Vincent Corsetti?" she asked back, her voice shaking. "A dangerous man," he answered honestly. "A failed father. And now, a man standing in front of the first woman who has ever made him want to become someone better." Grace did not step back, and she knew, with absolute clarity, that it was the biggest and sweetest mistake of her life. His second month began with a peaceful morning like any other, and ended in a nightmare Grace would never forget. It happened too fast, too sudden, like a storm dropping out of a clear blue sky. Grace was taking Mia to a routine checkup with Dr. Chen. Marcus drove as usual, and another guard sat in the front passenger seat. They had just pulled into the private, recessed driveway of the clinic. Marcus stepped out first to scan the area, while Grace reached over to unbuckle Mia's seatbelt. For a split second, the heavy armored door was pushed open, creating a momentary breach in their circle of safety. Patricia Holloway stood outside the car, her face flushed red with alcohol and madness, her eyes bloodshot and feral. She slammed an iron rod against the window, her mouth screaming words that barely formed into sentences. "My grandchild. Give me my grandchild back. Child thief. Murderer." Marcus jumped out, but Patricia had already swung around to the other side, where Mia was sitting. She yanked at the door, and even though it was locked, the strength of her frenzy drove her to pull and pound and scream. Mia shrank back, eyes wide with terror, mouth open, but no sound came out. Grace moved on instinct. She pulled Mia tight into her arms, turned her own body into a shield, and tried to twist so the child would not have to see her grandmother's face distorted by hate. But Patricia had been hiding in the shadows of the clinic's service entrance, waiting for that exact second of vulnerability. She lunged from a blind spot, throwing her weight against the open door before Marcus could swing back. Before Grace could pull the door shut or shield the child, Patricia's arm reached inside, and a knife sliced through the air. Pain, tearing pain in Grace's left arm. She looked down and saw blood, bright and hot, soaking through her sleeve and dripping onto the floor of the car. "You stole my grandchild!" Patricia shrieked, reaching into the car to grab at Mia. "You and that devil. You killed my daughter and now you steal my grandchild." Marcus appeared behind Patricia and locked her arms back with a fast, precise movement. The knife clattered onto the pavement, but Patricia kept thrashing, kept screaming, kept trying to break free with the impossible strength of madness. "Do not die, Mama Grace. Do not die," Mia screamed, and it was the first time since the night in the rain that the child shouted. Dark brown eyes flooded with primal fear, the fear of a child who had watched her mother die and was now terrified of losing one more person. "Mia, look at me, Grace said, her voice shaking but forcing calm. "I am okay. Do you see? Just a little cut. I am fine." But the blood kept flowing, soaking through Grace's fingers as she tried to press the wound shut. The world began to spin, and she had to lean against the seat to keep from collapsing. After that, everything became a blur of chaos. Police cars arrived. Patricia was taken away, still screaming curses. An ambulance appeared from somewhere, and Grace was strapped to a gurney, even though she insisted she did not need it. Mia refused to leave her, clinging to Grace's uninjured hand as if her life depended on it. They brought her back to Vincent's private hospital, where Dr. Chen was waiting with a medical team. The wound was not very deep, only requiring 12 stitches, but Grace had lost a fair amount of blood and needed rest. Mia sat beside her bed, refusing to go anywhere, eyes red from crying, her hand still wrapped around Grace's. Vincent arrived within 20 minutes. He burst into the room like a storm, his face drained white, his eyes wild. When he saw Grace on the bed with her arm wrapped in bandages, he stopped as if someone had punched him in the chest. "I will kill her," he said, his voice low and lethal. "I will kill her myself." "Vincent," Grace said, weak. "Do not. Not in front of Mia." Vincent looked down at his daughter curled beside Grace, and the fury in his eyes softened a little, only a little. He drew in a deep breath, then stepped to the bed and dropped to one knee, wrapping both Mia and Grace into his arms. "I am sorry," he whispered, and Grace did not know who he was speaking to. "I am sorry. I swear I will not let this happen again. No one hurts you anymore. No one." Mia cried into her father's chest, and Grace felt Vincent's arms tighten, as if he feared that if he let go, she would vanish. "She will not come near you again," Vincent said, his voice like steel. "I will make sure of it." Grace wanted to ask what he was going to do, but part of her did not want to know. Part of her, the part she did not want to admit existed, even felt safe knowing someone was willing to do anything to protect her. That night, Patricia Holloway was found in a psychiatric hospital in the suburbs of Chicago. Voluntary admission. Marcus reported to Vincent, while Grace pretended to sleep. "She will not be out for a very long time." Grace did not ask what voluntary meant in Vincent Corsetti's world. She knew the answer would not be something she wanted to hear. But when she looked down at Mia sleeping soundly beside her, the small hand still gripping hers as if afraid she would disappear, Grace realized her moral boundaries were beginning to blur. Maybe in a perfect world, she would have condemned violence and demanded justice through the law. But this was not a perfect world. This was a world where a mad old woman could shatter a car window and stab an innocent woman in broad daylight. This was a world where a 5-year-old had already seen too much violence and loss. And in that world, Grace realized she was standing on Vincent Corsetti's side not only because she had no choice, but because some part of her wanted to. It was the most frightening thought she had ever had. Grace's arm slowly healed, but something else was taking shape inside this penthouse, something she could not name, yet felt every time Vincent was near. The 3rd month began with late-night conversations on the balcony, when Mia slept deeply and the city of Chicago spread beneath them like a carpet sewn with diamonds. On the first night, Vincent told her about his mother. They stood side by side, each with a drink in hand, staring into the darkness as he began without needing Grace to ask. "I was 12 years old when my mother was kidnapped," he said, his voice low and far away, as if he were speaking about a life that belonged to someone else. "A rival crew wanted leverage on my father. They held her for 5 days." He paused, swallowing hard. "On the 6th day, they sent her back, in a box." Grace set her hand on his arm without thinking, feeling the muscle go rigid beneath his shirt. "My father changed after that," Vincent continued. "He became obsessed with control, controlling everything, everyone, every variable that could happen. He said if he controlled well enough, no one could hurt his family again." A bitter laugh escaped him. "I grew up learning to believe that loving someone means keeping them safe at any cost, that loosening your grip is opening the door to tragedy." Grace stayed quiet and let him speak, understanding these were words he had never said to anyone. "Sarah was the first person I loved after my mother," Vincent said, "and I tried to control her the way my father taught me. I thought if I held her tight enough, safe enough, nothing could touch her. But I was wrong." His voice broke. "I could not control what was happening inside her. The addiction, the pain, the emptiness that not even all my money and power could fill. Sarah's death is not your fault," Grace said softly. "You cannot save someone who does not want to be saved." "I know," Vincent nodded. "Rationally, I know. But the rest of me, the part that saw my mother inside a wooden box, that part cannot accept it." He turned to look at her, and there was fire burning in those obsidian eyes. "That part says I did not control well enough, that if I had been more careful, watched closer, Sarah would still be alive. And now you are doing the same thing with me," Grace said, not as a question. "With Mia, controlling to protect." Vincent did not deny it. He studied her for a long moment, then lifted his hand and touched the new scar on her arm, his fingers trembling slightly. "When I heard Patricia attacked you," he said, his voice rough. I thought my heart stopped. In those seconds, before I knew it was only a minor injury, I saw a future without you in it, and I could not bear it. Grace felt her breathing grow heavier. Vincent, I know I have no right, he cut in, but he did not take his hand away. You are not my wife. You are not even my lover. You are just the woman who walked into my life to save my daughter and somehow saved me, too. He drew in a shaking breath. But when I see you with Mia, when I hear her call you Mama, when I see you smile and know that smile is real, not because of fear or money, I want to. He did not finish. He did not have to. His eyes said everything. Grace knew she should step back. She should remind him about the cage, about the control, about all the reasons this was wrong, but she was tired of fighting. 11 years of loneliness, 11 years of carrying everything on her own shoulders, 11 years without anyone looking at her the way Vincent was looking at her now. What did you do to Patricia? Grace asked. Not because she wanted to know, but because she needed to hear him be honest. What had to be done to protect you and Mia? Vincent replied without flinching. Do you want me to lie and say I only called the police and let the law handle it? No, Grace surprised herself by answering. I do not want you to lie. They stood there in the late-night silence, with all the unsaid words hanging between them like fog. Vincent's fingers still rested on her hand, and Grace did not pull away. Below them, Chicago glittered like a kingdom, and Grace realized she was standing on the edge of a decision that would change her life forever. You are the first person, Vincent said, his voice like breath, I want to talk to, not for business, not for duty, just because I want to hear your voice, see your face, know what you think. He tilted his head, dark eyes holding an entire universe. Do you know how terrifying that is? For someone like me. I know, Grace whispered. Because I feel it too. The fire between them smoldered, not yet ablaze, but not extinguished either. And they both knew that all it would take was one small spark, and everything would burn beyond saving. Mia's birthday fell in the 3rd week of the 3rd month, and Vincent had turned the entire penthouse into a pink fairy tale kingdom. Balloons were everywhere. Glittering ribbons hung from the ceiling. A massive castle-shaped birthday cake with 6 candles stood in the center of the living room like a work of art. There were no outside guests. Only this small family, Rosa, Marcus, and a few of Vincent's most trusted people gathered to witness the child who had once been silent in the dark, now laughing until the sound filled every corner of the room. Mia wore the pink princess dress she had demanded all week, a sparkling plastic crown perched on her black curls, and her bright smile never left her little face. She ran from one person to another, showing off that Biscuit the rabbit was wearing a pink dress too, and when it was time to blow out the candles, she closed her eyes and made a wish with such solemn intensity that everyone seemed to hold their breath. What did you wish for? Grace asked after Mia blew out the candles. Cannot say. Mia shook her head seriously. If you say it, it will not come true. But I wished about Papa and Mama Grace. Then she covered her mouth as if she had said too much, and ran off to play with Rosa. Grace stood there, her heart beating out of rhythm, not daring to look at Vincent even though she could feel his gaze burning against her cheek. The party continued with cake and games, and Grace tried to act normal, laugh at the right moments, say the right things, but inside her a storm was rising. After Mia fell asleep, with her stomach full of frosting and her crown still on her head, Grace slipped out to the balcony to breathe the night air. She needed distance. She needed quiet. She needed time to gather the pieces of emotion splintering inside her chest, but distance did not come. Vincent followed her outside, 2 glasses of wine in his hands, his steps as silent as a cat's. The party was a success, he said, standing beside her and offering 1 glass. For the first time in 2 years, I heard my daughter laugh like a real child. Grace took the glass, letting warmth from their fingers brush for a brief moment. Mia deserves to be happy. So do you. She turned to look at him, and that was her greatest mistake, because Vincent was looking at her as if she were the sun and the moon and every star gathered into one. Those obsidian eyes glittered in the city light, and in them Grace saw everything he did not say, every word he swallowed, every desire he held back. Vincent, she whispered, meaning to say something, meaning to push him away, meaning to remind herself of all the reasons they should not, but he did not give her the chance. His hand came up to her cheek, warm and trembling, as if he were touching something so precious, he feared he might break it. His thumb stroked gently along her cheekbone, and Grace felt her breath catch. You changed everything, Grace Mitchell, he said, his voice rough and low as a cello. You walked into my life on a stormy night, and since then I have not been the same man. I did not do anything, Grace answered, but her voice was so weak she did not even believe it. You did everything. Vincent tilted his head, the distance between them shrinking. You saved my daughter. You brought laughter back into this home. You look at me as if I am not a monster. Do you know what that means to a man who is used to being seen with fear? Grace wanted to step back. She wanted to remind him about the golden cage, about the control, about all the reasons this was the wrong decision. But her body did not obey. Her body leaned toward him, the way a flower leans toward the sun. I am going to kiss you, Vincent said, his voice like a final warning. If you do not want it, say so now. Step away, and I will pretend tonight never existed. Grace knew she should say no. She knew this was the last boundary, and once crossed there would be no way back. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was not refusal. I do not want you to pretend. Their first kiss was so gentle it hardly felt real, only lips brushing for a brief moment. Then Vincent pulled her closer, and the kiss turned deeper, hotter, more desperate. Grace tasted wine on his mouth. She felt his strong hands lock around her waist, as if he feared she might vanish. She felt her own heart melting and freezing at the same time. When they finally separated, both of them were breathing hard. Vincent rested his forehead against Grace's, his eyes still closed. Now you truly belong to me, he whispered, and those words were both tenderness and a declaration of war. Grace trembled, not sure whether it was cold, or fear, or happiness, maybe all three. She only knew she had walked through the final door, and the key had been thrown away. From Mia's doorway, the small child stood in the shadows, smiling with Biscuit in her arms. The wish came true, Biscuit, she whispered. Papa and Mama Grace together forever. After the kiss on Mia's birthday night, everything changed in ways Grace had not seen coming. Vincent did not become gentler, the way she had imagined. He became more protective, more controlling, more obsessed, as if that kiss had opened a door inside him, and what waited behind it was not soft love, but a burning fire that wanted to swallow her whole into his darkness. At first, the changes were small. Grace was no longer allowed to leave the penthouse, not even with Marcus. Too dangerous, Vincent said when she asked. Patricia still has people outside. I will not take the risk. Then the phone calls grew more tightly monitored. Rosa gently reminded her that any contact with the outside world needed to be approved first. And finally there was the new phone, loaded with more apps, more tracking features, more ways for Vincent to know where she was and what she was doing every second. Grace tried to adapt. She told herself it was only temporary, that Vincent was scared after what Patricia had done, that things would soften once everything settled. But weeks passed, then a month, and the cage did not open. It only tightened. One afternoon, while Mia was napping, Grace happened to find her old graphic design portfolio inside one of the cardboard boxes Rosa had stored in the closet. She sat down on the floor and turned the pages, looking at the work she had finished back when she was a student. Dreams of a creative career, of opening her own studio, of a life where she decided the direction. All of it had been buried under debt and waitressing, and now it was being buried deeper under Vincent Corsetti's luxury and protection. She wanted to draw again. She wanted to make something that belonged to her, something that was not clothes bought for her, or meals prepared for her, or a life arranged for her. She wanted, even for a few hours, to do something for herself and not for Mia or Vincent. That night, Grace waited until Vincent was home and brought it up. I found my old portfolio, she began, trying to keep her voice steady. I studied graphic design before life happened. I want to sign up for a class. There is a community center a few blocks away. They have a class on Saturday mornings. Vincent was reading paperwork. He looked up when he heard her, obsidian eyes sliding over her face. Then he went back to the papers. No, he said, as simply as refusing a cup of tea. Anger flared in Grace's chest, but she forced it down. I can have Marcus with me, or anyone you want, just a few hours every week. I said no, Grace. Vincent set his pen down and looked at her with a final expression. That area is not safe. The building does not have adequate emergency exits. Too many variables I cannot control. Variables, Grace repeated, her voice rising despite herself. You are talking about my life like it is a problem to solve. I am talking about your safety like it is the most important thing to me, Vincent shot back, standing and stepping toward her. Because it is. Safety or control. The words came out before Grace could stop them. Because since we kissed, you have been tightening everything more and more. I cannot go outside. I cannot make a phone call freely. I cannot do anything without someone watching me. Is that safety? Or is that prison? Silence dropped between them like a stone. Vincent stood there, jaw clenched, his eyes holding something Grace could not read. I will hire a private tutor for you, he said at last, his voice cool and even. The best. You can study design right here, in the penthouse, with every piece of equipment and software you need. That is not what I want. Grace could not hold it back anymore. I do not want an expensive tutor in a luxurious room. I want to step outside, breathe air, meet other people, do something normal like a normal human being. You are not normal anymore, Vincent said, and the sentence hit Grace like a slap. You are Vincent Corsetti's woman. You are my daughter's mother, even if not by blood. That comes with a price. The price is my freedom. The price is protection. Vincent moved closer and set his hand on her shoulder, and even though Grace wanted to jerk away, her body did not obey. I know you feel caged. I know you hate this, but you do not understand my world, Grace. The people who want to hurt me will not hesitate to use you to get to me, and I would rather you hate me than see you in a coffin. Tears rose in Grace's eyes, but she did not let them fall. She did not want him to see weakness. You cannot keep me like this forever. Watch me. It was not a threat. It was a statement. A fact. A stone wall Grace was slamming her head into. She turned away and walked quickly to her room. And this time Vincent did not follow. She shut the door, leaned her back against the cold wood, and finally let the tears fall. She looked into the mirror on the wall and saw a woman in expensive silk, hair brushed smooth, skin bright with luxury makeup. That woman looked beautiful, looked cared for, looked like she belonged in this world. But the eyes, the green eyes staring back, were empty. Where was Grace Mitchell, the girl who lived in a leaking studio but could go anywhere she wanted? Where was the woman who once dreamed of a design studio and a life she built herself? That woman was dead, buried under silk and diamonds and the toxic love of a Mafia boss. Grace wiped her tears and looked at herself again. No, she told herself. She is not dead. She is only sleeping. And someday, she will wake. A week after the argument about the design class, Grace and Vincent barely spoke to each other beyond polite phrases in front of Mia. The air in the penthouse felt heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks, and even Rosa moved more quietly, careful not to make any sound that might set off the bomb waiting to explode. But fate had its own way of reminding Grace that the world outside this golden cage was more dangerous than she had believed. That morning began normally. Grace took Mia to Dr. Chen's clinic for a routine checkup, a trip planned the week before and reluctantly approved by Vincent, on the condition that 3 guards go with them instead of 1. They rode in an armored vehicle. The route was cleared ahead of time. Marcus sat beside Grace with his hand resting on the gun hidden under his coat. Everything went smoothly until they left the clinic. Mia held Grace's hand, chatting about how Dr. Chen had praised her for gaining weight and getting stronger, when gunfire cracked through the air. It happened in an instant. Marcus shoved Grace and Mia down behind the car, his body covering them like a human shield. The other 2 guards drew their weapons. Return fire exploded in a deafening burst. Grace pulled Mia tight against her chest, covered the child's ears with both hands, and felt the small body trembling violently in her arms. It is all right. It is all right, Grace whispered, not knowing whether she was speaking to Mia or to herself. Mama Grace is here. Mama Grace will not let anyone hurt you. The shooting lasted perhaps a minute, but to Grace it felt like a century. Then silence. A terrible silence. Only ragged breathing, and the distant wail of police sirens drifting closer. We are safe, Marcus said, tense but steady. Get in the car. Now. They were shoved inside. The doors slammed. The vehicle shot forward like a bullet. Grace did not dare look outside. She did not dare loosen her hold on Mia, even as the child sobbed into her chest. She only held on, as if letting go would make the world collapse. When they reached the penthouse, Vincent was waiting at the elevator. His face was white as paper, his eyes wild, and when he saw Grace and Mia alive, he surged forward and wrapped both of them in his arms with a force that almost hurt. Who? Vincent's voice was a growl. Who did this? The Rivera crew, Marcus reported, his tone controlled, though his hands were clenched into fists. They wanted to send a message. No one was seriously injured, but they almost— He did not finish. He did not need to. Everyone understood what almost meant. Vincent lifted Mia into his arms and held his daughter tight against his chest, then turned and looked at Grace. And in those obsidian eyes, Grace saw something that made her shiver. Not relief, not love, but madness. The madness of an animal backed into a corner, ready to tear apart anything to protect its pack. "No one leaves this penthouse again," he said, his voice like steel. "No one. Not for any reason." "Vincent," Grace began, but he cut her off. "This is not a negotiation, Grace." He stepped closer, one arm still holding Mia, the other hand closing around Grace's arm with a strength that would almost certainly leave bruises. "Today they fired at your car. Tomorrow they might succeed. I will never let that happen. Do you understand?" Grace looked into his eyes and saw the fear hiding behind the fury, and she understood arguing now would be useless. She nodded, silent, and let him lead her and Mia into the living room. That night, after Mia finally managed to fall asleep with Grace lying beside her, the small hand clutching Grace's shirt, Grace stared up at the ceiling and thought. She hated this cage, hated Vincent's control, hated losing her freedom and her right to choose. But today, when the gunfire erupted and the outside world showed her how lethal it could be, part of her, the part she did not want to admit existed, felt grateful for the cage, grateful that Marcus had shielded her and Mia, grateful for the armored car that had stopped the bullets, grateful for Vincent's arms wrapping around them when they got home, even if those arms were also shackles. Grace closed her eyes, feeling Mia's warm body curled beside her, and wondered what she had become. Was she trapped in Stockholm Syndrome, loving the man who was holding her captive? Or was this truly love, only arriving in a twisted shape she did not know how to recognize? She had no answer. Only darkness, the steady breathing of the child, the footsteps of guards patrolling the hallway beyond the door. And in that darkness, Grace realized a frightening truth. She was no longer sure she wanted to escape this cage, because outside the cage was a world that wanted to kill her and the child she loved. And inside the cage, even if it was suffocating, even if it hurt, at least they were alive. At least they were together. The 5th month passed under the tense atmosphere of a fortress preparing for war. Vincent disappeared into meetings that stretched deep into the night, his low, threatening voice carrying through closed doors. The Rivera crew had paid for the attack, from what Grace overheard, but she did not ask for details and Vincent did not explain. There were things she did not want to know, things that would make it impossible to look him in the eye again. Patricia Holloway had been handled thoroughly as well. Not with violence, Marcus said, but with legal paperwork and money and power. She was locked inside a high-security psychiatric facility, with no visitation rights, no right to appeal, no way out. A threat had been neutralized. Grace knew she should feel relieved, and part of her did, but the rest of her felt only tired, exhausted from living in constant vigilance, exhausted from loving a man she did not fully understand, exhausted from mothering a child she had not given birth to, yet loved as deeply as blood. That night, Vincent took Grace and Mia to a private rooftop restaurant on the top floor of a building he owned. The entire level had been emptied, only them, and a staff that had been thoroughly vetted. Candlelight trembled on the table. Classical music drifted softly from somewhere unseen, and Chicago stretched beneath them like a carpet of diamonds. Mia was thrilled by a chocolate dessert the chef made just for her, unaware of the strange atmosphere between the two adults. Grace sat across from Vincent and felt something coming, something large and irreversible. After Rosa took Mia out to the balcony to look at the view and eat ice cream, Vincent placed his hand on the table, palm up, like an invitation. "Grace," he said, his voice low and faintly unsteady, something Grace had never heard from a man who controlled everything. "I am not good at saying loving things. I grew up in a world where affection is weakness, and loving someone means handing your enemy a weapon to use against you." Grace stayed silent, her heart beating faster with every word. "But you changed that." Vincent looked at her, obsidian eyes shimmering in the candlelight. "You walked into my life on a stormy night, saved my daughter, and somehow saved my soul with her. You are the first person who looked at me not with fear, not with greed, but simply looked at me." He withdrew his hand from the table, and when he brought it back, a black velvet box rested in his palm. Grace stopped breathing. "I know I am not perfect," Vincent continued, opening the box to reveal a diamond so absurdly large it glittered like a star trapped in white gold. "I control too much. I am jealous. I protect you in ways that make you feel suffocated. But all of that, however wrong, comes from one single truth." He stood, walked around the table, and went down on one knee in front of Grace. At that exact moment, Mia ran in from the balcony, her eyes bright when she saw her father kneeling. "Grace Mitchell," Vincent said, his voice carrying in the stillness. "You saved my daughter. You saved me. You brought light into our house of darkness. And I, a man who does not deserve you, am asking you for one thing." He drew in a trembling breath. "Be my wife. Let me love you, protect you, cherish you until the last day of my life." "Say yes, Mama Grace," Mia bounced, unable to hold it in. "Say yes. I want a real family." Grace looked down at the child holding her hand, dark brown eyes overflowing with hope. Then she looked at Vincent, the man on his knee with the diamond in his hand and all his flaws laid bare. She thought about the cage, about the control, about the nights she cried alone, and the days she felt herself disappearing. She thought of all the reasons she should say no, but then she thought about the kiss on the balcony, about his arms around her after the attack, about the way he looked at her as if she were an entire universe, about Mia, the child who called her mother and needed her the way lungs need air. "Yes," Grace heard herself say, and the word came out like a breath she had held too long. "I will." Mia shrieked with joy and threw herself into both adults. Vincent slid the ring onto Grace's finger, his eyes shining with something she had never seen in him before. Maybe happiness, maybe victory, maybe both. And Grace, with the heavy diamond on her hand and a child's arms around her neck, wondered whether she had just chosen heaven or hell. Maybe, she thought as Vincent kissed her through Mia's laughter, the two were really the same thing. 2 months after the proposal, Grace stood in front of the bedroom mirror and did not recognize the woman staring back at her. The diamond on her finger glittered like a star. Her hair had been styled to perfection by the private stylist Vincent hired. Her skin glowed with the most expensive products in the world. She looked like a painting, a piece of art displayed in a billionaire's living room. Beautiful, perfect, and completely empty. Everything began to collapse that afternoon, when Grace happened to find her old design portfolio tucked into the corner of the closet. She turned the pages, looking at the drawings she had made back when she was a student, full of hope, and something inside her ignited, not the fire of love, the fire of anger. 7 months. 7 months she had not stepped out of this building alone. 7 months without seeing a friend, without doing one single thing for herself, without existing beyond the role of Vincent Corsetti's lover and Mia's mother. 7 months of slowly dissolving inside this golden cage until there was nothing left. Grace waited until Mia was asleep, then found Vincent in his office. He sat behind his desk, paperwork piled high, and looked up with a smile when he saw her. That smile, the smile that once made her heart melt, now only made her angrier. "I want to enroll in a graphic design class," she said plainly, without detours. "Not a private tutor. A real class. Outside." Vincent's smile vanished. "Grace, we have discussed this." "No, you have ordered this. I have never been allowed to discuss it. Not safe." His voice shifted into that familiar coldness. "After the attack, I thought you understood. I understand that someone wants to hurt us," Grace said, her voice rising. "But I also understand I cannot live like this forever." 7 months, Vincent. 7 months I have not left this building alone, and you are still alive, still safe, still whole." Vincent stood and came toward her. "Is that not what matters? Alive." Grace let out a bitter laugh. "You call this alive? I am locked in a gold-plated apartment, watched every moment, controlled in every way. I cannot see friends. I cannot do the work I love. I cannot step outside to breathe air unless 5 guards come with me. That is not living. That is existing, in a golden cage with you as the warden." The words hung between them, heavy and painful. Vincent stood there, jaw clenched, obsidian eyes burning with something Grace could not read. Anger, hurt, maybe both. "Do you think I want it this way?" he asked, his voice low and shaking. "Do you think I enjoy watching you sad, watching you wither in this room? I do everything to protect you, Grace, because I cannot bear losing you." "But you are losing me!" Grace shouted, tears finally spilling free. "Every day, little by little, you are pushing me farther away. I love you, Vincent. I love Mia, but I am also losing myself. And if I lose who I am, what is left for you to protect?" Vincent was silent, and in that moment, Grace saw the crack in his armor. Not cold control, not crushing power. Fear, primal, deep, the fear of a man who has lost too much and cannot survive losing more. "My mother died because I could not protect her," he said, his voice like a blade cutting an old wound open. Sarah died because I could not control her addiction. Mia almost died because I did not see her in that parking lot. Do you think I can endure losing you too? Do you think I can live if something happens to you because I loosened my grip? I am not your mother, Grace said, her voice softening a little when she saw the pain in his eyes. I am not Sarah. You cannot save them by imprisoning me. Then what do you want me to do? Vincent shouted, and it was the first time Grace had ever heard him lose control. Let you go outside and wait for the call that you have been shot, stabbed, kidnapped. Let Mia lose another mother. I want you to trust me, Grace shouted back, stepping toward him. I want you to let me live like a human being, not like a priceless object locked inside a glass case. I want you to love me without destroying me. They stood facing each other, both breathing hard, both with tears in their eyes. Then small footsteps sounded in the hallway. Stop fighting. Mia's voice trembled from the doorway. She stood there in pink pajamas, biscuit pressed tight to her chest, dark brown eyes overflowing with tears. Stop fighting. Do not go, Mama Grace. Please do not go. Grace felt her heart break. She dropped to her knees, opened her arms, and Mia ran into her, clinging with the fear of a child who had lost too much. Mama is not going anywhere. Sweetheart, Grace whispered, wiping tears so the child would not see. Mama promises. Mama will never leave you. Above them, Vincent stood there, looking down at the woman he loved, holding the daughter he worshipped. And in his obsidian eyes, Grace saw something shift, not surrender, but perhaps realization that the way he loved was destroying the thing he wanted to protect. We will talk, he said at last, weary. After Mia is asleep again, we will talk. Grace nodded, lifted Mia into her arms, and carried her back to bed. But as she passed Vincent, his hand brushed lightly over her back, and she heard a whisper that sounded like an open wound. I do not know any other way to love you, Grace, but I will learn. If you give me the chance, I will learn. And for the first time in 7 months, Grace saw a small light flickering at the end of the tunnel. After Mia finally fell back asleep, her small hand gripping Grace's as if afraid she might vanish, Grace returned to Vincent's office. He was no longer behind the desk. He stood by the window looking out at late-night Chicago, his back to her, his shoulders slumped as if the whole world sat on them. I was 12 years old when my mother died. Vincent began without turning around, his voice low and distant, as if he were speaking about a previous lifetime. You have heard that story, but you have not heard all of it. Grace stood in the doorway. She did not speak. She did not move. She only listened. They held her for 5 days. 5 days I listened to my father make frantic calls, screaming, threatening, begging. 5 days I prayed to a God I no longer believed in. Vincent drew in a trembling breath. On the 6th day, they sent her back. In a wooden box, she was still wearing the blue dress I liked best. Tears rose in Grace's eyes, but she did not let them fall. Not yet. My father changed after that, Vincent continued, his voice hardening. He became obsessed with control, controlling every variable, every possibility, every road that might lead to tragedy. He said loving someone means protecting them at any cost, even if the cost is their freedom. He turned to look at Grace, obsidian eyes shimmering with the city lights. I grew up believing that, like a religion. But you are not your father, Grace said softly, stepping into the room. Am I not? Vincent let out a bitter laugh. Look at me, Grace. Look at what I am doing to you. I am repeating his mistakes exactly. The only difference is that my cage is plated in gold instead of made of steel. He sank into the armchair by the window, his head dropping into his hands, and Grace saw something she had never seen in this man. Collapse, complete, unmasked, broken. Sarah hated me, he said, his voice thick. In the last years, before she died, she hated me. She said I was suffocating her, that I loved her the way you love a prisoner, that she would rather die than live one more day under my control. His voice fractured, and then she did die, and I do not know if it was the drugs, or if she wanted to escape me. Grace moved closer, dropped to her knees in front of him, and set her hand on his knee. Sarah died because of addiction, Vincent, not because of you. You do not understand. He lifted his head, eyes red and wet. I tried everything. The most expensive rehab, the best doctors, locking her in the house with guards, but I could not control what was inside her. The hunger that never quieted, the pain that never eased. And when I failed, when I could not save her, I thought I had not controlled tightly enough. Grace took his hand and squeezed gently. You cannot save anyone by imprisoning them. You can only love them and hope they choose to live. The final decision is never yours. But what if I let go and you get hurt? Vincent asked, his voice like a lost child. What if I give you freedom and someone takes you from me? What if Mia loses another mother? Then we face it together, Grace said, lifting his face so he would look at her. But I cannot face losing myself, Vincent. If you keep holding me like this, you will not lose me to violence or accident. You will lose me because I will disappear from the inside. And then, even if I am still here, I will not be the woman you love anymore. Vincent closed his eyes. At last, tears slid down his cheeks, and Grace realized this was the first time she had ever seen him cry. Not from physical pain, not from grief, but because he was looking straight at the truth of himself. I do not know how to love without control, he whispered. It is the only way I know. Then learn another way, Grace said, gentle but firm. I will be here. Mia will be here. But you have to want to change. You have to choose to love me as a partner, not as a precious object you hide away. What if I cannot? Then I will have to leave. The words hurt as they came out, but Grace knew she had to tell the truth. Not because I do not love you, but because I love myself enough not to let anyone, even the man I love, destroy me. They sat in silence, two broken people trying to figure out how to fit their pieces back together. Outside, Chicago still glittered, indifferent to the small tragedies unfolding behind glass walls. Finally, Vincent stood, pulled Grace up with him, and wrapped her in his arms. Not the arms of control, not the arms of possession, but the arms of a man clinging desperately to the one thing that made life mean anything. I will learn, he whispered into her hair. No matter how long it takes, I will learn how to love you the right way. I swear it. Grace held him tight, feeling his heart pounding hard against her ear. She did not know whether he would keep that promise, but for the first time in 7 months, she had hope, and hope, however fragile, was still better than darkness. The next morning, Grace woke with a new determination. She knew last night had been a turning point, but words alone were not enough. She needed concrete change, clear boundaries, agreements they could both live by, and she would not back down until she had them. Vincent was sitting in the dining room when Grace came downstairs, a cup of cold coffee in front of him, dark circles under his eyes from too little sleep. He looked up when he saw her, and in those obsidian eyes there was something new. Not the familiar cold control, but waiting, readiness. I have been thinking all night, she said, taking the seat across from him. And I have some conditions. Vincent nodded. He did not interrupt. He did not argue. He only listened. First, I want the freedom to go out. Grace lifted a hand when she saw him about to speak. I am not saying alone. I understand there are real dangers, but I want to decide when I go and where I go, not ask permission like a child. Marcus or anyone you choose can come with me, but they are protection, not wardens. Vincent was quiet for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. Fine, he said at last, but I need to know your plans at least a day in advance, so I can arrange security. Grace nodded. That was a compromise she could accept. Second, I want to enroll in a graphic design class. She kept going before he could object. Not the community center, if you are worried about security. I will find a private school, somewhere you can vet and make sure is safe. But I need this, Vincent. I need something of my own. Something that is not about you or Mia or this penthouse. Vincent watched her for a long time, and Grace could see the battle inside him, between fear and love, between control and letting go. Finally, he let out a breath. I will find a suitable school, he said. A safe place where you can study without worrying. Relief rose in Grace's chest, but she was not finished. Third, Mia needs to go to school. This was the most important, and also the hardest thing for Vincent to accept. A real preschool, with other children. She needs friends. She needs to learn how to live in the real world, not be isolated inside a gold-plated fortress. Vincent's face tightened. The last time Mia went to school, Patricia kidnapped her, and this time will be different. We will choose carefully. We will have security. We will have procedures. But Mia cannot grow up in fear, Vincent. She has lost her mother. She has been abandoned by her grandmother. She has been through enough trauma to haunt her for life. What she needs now is to learn how to trust the world, not learn how to fear it. Silence stretched between them. Grace could see Vincent wrestling with himself, with every protective instinct screaming that keeping Mia home was safer. But he also knew she was right. Grace saw it in the way he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "I will find a school with the best security." Grace nodded, but she had one more condition, the most important one. "And fourth," she said, her voice softening, "I want you to go to therapy." Vincent opened his eyes and looked at her with surprise. "Not because you are crazy," Grace said quickly, "but because you have wounds that have never healed. Losing your mother, losing Sarah, the fear of losing more. Those things do not disappear, Vincent. They only go deeper and control you in ways you do not notice." "I do not need a shrink to tell me I have problems," Vincent said, but his voice was no longer defensive, only tired. "You need someone to help you face those problems without pushing away the people you love." Grace reached across the table and took his hand. "I love you, Vincent. I want to be with you, but I cannot be your doctor. I cannot be the one to heal every wound you carry. I can only be your partner, and to do that, you need professional help." Vincent looked down at her hand holding his fingers trembling slightly. Grace could see the struggle in him, pride against love, stubbornness against the hunger to change. At last he lifted his head, obsidian eyes meeting hers. "All right," he said, and that simple word carried the weight of an entire empire learning how to bow. "Everything, the class, the school for Mia, the therapy, everything, for you, for us." Tears rose in Grace's eyes, but this time they were tears of hope. She stood, walked around the table, and wrapped her arms around Vincent from behind, her chin resting on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. Vincent took her hand, lifted it to his mouth, and pressed a gentle kiss to her fingers. "Do not thank me. I am the one who should thank you for not leaving when you could have." They sat in silence, two people finally finding a shared language. Outside, the Chicago sun was rising, pouring warm gold through the glass, and Grace felt as if this were the first day of a new life. Not perfect, but theirs. 18 months of grueling, slow progress followed, a period Grace was afraid to believe was real. The changes came slowly, one small step at a time, like murky water wearing down stone. Vincent began seeing a therapist twice a week, an older man named Richard whom he hated at first, but gradually came to respect. There were days he came home with red-rimmed eyes and did not speak a single word. There were nights he jolted awake from nightmares, and days when his old instincts flared, leading to heated arguments when he tried to tighten the leash again. But each time, they returned to the boundaries they had set. He did not quit, and Grace did not stop holding him accountable. That was what mattered most. Grace enrolled in a graphic design course at an upscale private school on the north side, where Vincent vetted security so thoroughly the headmaster seemed to think she was a princess from some distant country. Marcus still went with her every time, but he sat in the coffee shop across the street instead of standing at her shoulder like a threatening statue. It was a compromise, and Grace learned to value compromises the way she valued victories. Mia started preschool in September, at a small school with high walls and a guarded gate, but also a playground full of flowers and children's laughter. On the first day, Vincent could barely stand it. He sat in a black car outside the gate for 4 hours until Grace had to go out and pull him back. But when Mia ran out with a shining face, holding up a butterfly drawing she had made with a new friend named Sophia, Vincent knew they had made the right choice. And now, standing before the mirror in a bridal room dressed in white roses and candlelight, Grace looked at her reflection and almost did not recognize the woman looking back. The wedding dress she wore was not a designer label the way Vincent had wanted to buy. She had designed it herself, every line of it, as the capstone project for her design course. Simple ivory silk, delicate lace at the neckline and cuffs. No stones, no glittering sequins. It was her. It was Grace Mitchell, not a portrait someone else had painted. Rosa knocked softly, then stepped inside, her older eyes shining with tears when she saw Grace. "You look so beautiful, my girl," she said, her voice trembling. "Sarah would be so happy to know you are here, taking care of Mia and him." Grace embraced the housekeeper who had become a second mother over the past year, breathing in warmth and the familiar scent of lavender. "Thank you, Rosa, for everything." Mia burst into the room like a small pink whirlwind, her flower girl dress flaring and a crown of blossoms perched on her black curls. Mama Grace, Mama Grace. Papa said I have to give this to Mama." She held out a small velvet box, dark brown eyes glittering with excitement. Grace opened it and found a pair of pearl earrings, simple and elegant, with a small note in Vincent's familiar handwriting. "They belong to my mother. Now they belong to you, because you have become family." Tears rose, but Grace smiled, slipped the earrings on, and bent to kiss Mia. "Tell Papa, Mama loves Papa. I love Papa. And Mama. And Biscuit," Mia yelled, then raced away, her laughter echoing down the hallway. The wedding was held right there in the penthouse, on the balcony where they had kissed for the first time, where they had fought and made peace, where every rise and fall of this relationship had been witnessed. There were not hundreds of guests, though Vincent could have arranged them with ease. There was only Rosa, Marcus, Dr. Chen, a few of the most trusted people, and Mia standing between them, like a bridge between two souls. When Grace stepped onto the balcony, her hands gripping a bouquet of white roses, she saw Vincent waiting. He wore a classic black suit, but his eyes, those obsidian eyes she had loved and feared and loved again, were no longer cold. They shone with tears he did not try to hide. "You are so beautiful," he whispered when she reached him, his voice rough. "And I still do not understand why you are here." "Because she is crazy," Marcus said from behind, and everyone laughed. But Grace only smiled and took Vincent's hand. "Because you learned how to love me the right way, and because I learned to love myself enough to stay." Their vows were not traditional lines. Vincent vowed he would keep learning how to loosen his grip, that he would keep fighting the ghosts of the past, that he would love Grace as a partner, not as a precious object to be locked away. Grace vowed she would be patient on hard days, that she would tell the truth when she felt suffocated, that she would not run when things became difficult. And when they kissed, with Mia cheering and tossing petals into the air, with Chicago glittering below as if offering congratulations, Grace knew this was not the happily ever after of a fairy tale. This was the beginning of a journey, with all its trials and joys waiting ahead. "You are my freedom," Vincent whispered against her ear after the kiss, and this time the words did not frighten her. "Not a prisoner. Home." Grace held him close, feeling his heart beating in time with hers. "And you are where I choose to stay, not because of the cage, because of love." Mia wedged herself between them, demanding a hug, and they stood there, 3 people from 3 different worlds who had found each other on a stormy night and built a family out of broken pieces. Not perfect, but theirs. And sometimes, that is all you need. 2 years after the wedding, Grace stood on the familiar balcony, her hand resting lightly on her rounded 5-month belly, watching Chicago sink into a golden sunset. The city looked the same glittering skyscrapers, the same sweep of Lake Michigan stretched out like a mirror, but she was entirely different. Inside the penthouse, Mia's laughter rang out as she showed Rosa a painting she had just finished in her art class. 10 years old now, Mia had become a bright, confident little girl, dark brown eyes sparkling with joy instead of the hollow fear of the past. She had friends, she had school, she had a normal life inside the not normal world of her father, and most importantly, she had a complete family. Grace smiled when she heard the familiar footsteps behind her. Vincent stepped up beside her, his arms circling her waist from behind, his chin settling on her shoulder. He was still Vincent Corsetti, the powerful kingpin of Chicago, but those obsidian eyes no longer held the same darkness. They were warmer now, softer, especially when he looked at her and Mia. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "About that stormy night," Grace answered, leaning back against his chest. "About the tired waitress in the shabby diner. She could not imagine life would bring her here. She was brave," Vincent said. "Braver than anyone I have ever met. She only did the right thing." Grace turned to look at him, but she did not expect that phone call that night would change everything. Vincent pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I still do not deserve you." "Maybe not," Grace laughed softly, "but I chose to stay, and I do not regret it." Mia ran out onto the balcony, holding her drawing of 3 stick figures standing together, and a smaller stick figure inside the woman's belly. "Mama, Papa, look. I drew our family. The baby is in it too." Grace knelt and hugged the daughter she had not born, but loved as if by blood. "It is beautiful, sweetheart. The baby is going to love this picture." "Will the baby be a boy or a girl?" Mia asked, placing her small hand on Grace's belly with wide curiosity. "We will know soon," Grace said. "But whether it is a boy or a girl, you are going to be the best big sister, right?" Mia nodded eagerly, then ran back inside to show Rosa. Vincent helped Grace to her feet, both his hands resting on her belly with a gentleness Grace once never believed he could carry. "I have learned a lot in these 2 years," he said. "From Dr. Richard, from you, from Mia. That loving someone does not mean controlling them, that protecting does not mean imprisoning, that sometimes letting go is the tightest way to hold on." Grace took his hand and pressed it to her heart, And I have learned that freedom is not the absence of boundaries. Freedom is choosing to stay in someone's arms because of love, not because of fear. It is being yourself even when you belong to someone else. They stood there, watching the city lights begin to bloom, with the unborn child growing inside, Grace and Mia's laughter echoing from within. Not perfect, not a fairy tale, but theirs. Grace thought about her journey. From an invisible girl in a diner to a woman standing above the city. She had walked through darkness. She had fought for freedom. She had learned how to love and how to be loved. And the most important thing she learned was this: sometimes the cage does not disappear. It only opens its door. And when the right person holds the key, you realize you do not want to go anywhere at all. The storm brought me here, Grace whispered, as if speaking to herself. And I found home. Not in this penthouse, but in your arms, in Mia's laughter, in the family we are building. Vincent held her a little tighter, and they stayed there until the first stars appeared over Chicago. The story of Grace and Vincent teaches us that true love is never perfect. It demands change, sacrifice, and sometimes painful battles with your own self. But when two people are willing to face the ghosts of the past, willing to change for each other, they can build something beautiful out of broken pieces. And sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the darkest nights, from instinctive decisions made before you have time to think. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If this story touched your heart, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss new videos every day. Do not forget to like and share this video with the people you love, the people who also need a story that helps them believe in love and change. How do you feel about Grace and Vincent's journey? Have you ever had to fight for freedom in a relationship? Or have you ever learned to love someone in a different way? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly want to hear your stories and feelings from the deepest part of your heart. Every comment you leave is a powerful source of motivation for us to keep bringing you more meaningful stories. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a life filled with peace and joy each day. Remember, no matter how hard life gets, there is always light